So, namaste everyone. We'll start with Dr. KCV's commentary on Commandment 2. Begin your puja with a prayer for spiritual elevation, with heart full of love and devotion. O Master, thou art the real goal of human life. We are yet but slaves of wishes, putting bar to our advancement. Thou art the only God and power to bring us up to that stage. The second commandment has reference to the prayer which we offer. The prayer has three parts. The first refers to our goal, which is the highest or ultimate calmness beyond all our gross experiences. The second part has reference to the obstacles or impediments to the attainment of that goal or God. Master is the highest kind of existence, and it is him we have to reach. The vishesh, which are impediments to our return to or experience of God, are those which are other than our legitimate duties. We have each of us our duties, and these duties are cast on us by our very conditions of common life. In a sense, they are our swadharma, which should not be given up. As Sri Krishna has stated, it is necessary to do one's own duty rather than not do it. It is necessary not to do other person's duties, that is paradharma, which alone cause fear to each one of us. If we know this, then we will not venture to do other people's duties. This, in a sense, is a wish as distinguished from duty, that is dharma. These wishes may pertain to all that is not necessary for our attaining the highest state. The third part of the prayer shows that God, our Master, alone can lead us to that state, carrying us through all impediments and obstacles which we have created between the highest state and ourselves, thanks to lifelong attachment to wishes, desires, and other extraneous things. Briefly, the Master has sketched how we have descended by three steps. Firstly, there was that highest state of calm. This, of course, is the true bliss, transcendent state. This, of course, is the true bliss transcendent state. This is the highest reality and essence. The creation starts with essence descending, and due to this descent, we have the heat generated during this process. This gathers particles which have the essence, however, as the nucleus, but forming rings around it. Those drops or droplets gather together and form circles and circles, and forming into rivers, finally become like an ocean of heat. The samsara sagara, or the ocean of samsara, thus forms with extreme heat outside, though the inward calm essence is present.
Should we take a pause?
Yeah.
Just one question here. He says it is necessary not to do other person's duty, paradharma, which alone cause fear to each one of us. Just trying to make a meaning that paradharma and that causing fears.
It is basically he asks us to stick to what we have to do as our swadharma. For example, as a citizens of India, we have certain duties and our jobs. But if we are thinking that we should defeat the Pakistan or we should kill the Pakistanis or prevent them from entering our territory, if we are thinking like that and try to always think on that aspect only, that is paradharma. That is not our job. There are people who are ordained to do that job. The army is there, the border security force is there, the commanders are there, the defense ministry is there, and the prime minister is there. It is their job to do that. Our job is to do our duty, what is ordained to us. I am a doctor, so I have to do my duty as the doctor. I have nothing to do with the what is happening at the border. That is paradharma. So if I am thinking that I should do all that, then that creates a sense of restlessness in me or a fear in me that what is happening. So that is probably what he thinks is the paradharma. For example, in other words, if Narayan sir has given you some job to do, instead of doing that job, or even after doing that job, you think of doing a job given to somebody else and want to interfere in that one, then that is again paradharma only. You are not expected to do that, or you are not supposed to do that job, because your interference in that probably will spoil it also. Yes. So that creates a disturbance in the nature. So the story goes that Sri Aurobindo tried to interfere in the Second World War, and he has to pay penalty for that, because it is not his job to interfere. It is somebody else is doing that job, the World War II, and he's trying to interfere in that World War II. So he was asked to pay penalty for that. So such is the order of the nature, and we have to follow the order of the nature. So we have to, what is given to us, we have to do, not to interfere in somebody else's work or duty. That's probably what I understood.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
So I think the next statement relates to the second line of prayer, which is this in sense is a wish as distinguished from duty. So are we saying kind of paradharma is falls under wishes?
Yeah, looks like.
Okay, we'll go to the next paragraph. The outer rings with heat thus gives us the experience of sufferings and loss of calm. The search for calmness or peace of mind thus is set up. It is true that many persons think that this heat of the outer is the world of joys or ananda. But as we have said, it is but the inversion of the highest bliss. It is necessary to re-invert the whole being. This is done by piercing through the outer shells or rings and arriving at the central nucleus of calm essence within. This is what the master does when the prayer is offered. Thus, almost immediately after the prayer, we have the experience of inward calm in this marg, because The master, without any ado, removes the obstacles that are in the form of many activities around the particles that form the rings. This is the first step of the initiation. The master says the prayer implies the relationship of master and servant. The servant fully relies on the power of the master, who is established in the highest state and is absorbed in it always. The servanthood or dasya implies that he permits himself to be used as the master likes. That is for the purpose of not getting service from him, but for the purpose of raising his person to the highest condition. It has been said that once the individual surrenders himself to the highest then trains the servant for freedom and divine work. At the beginning, the individual is called a servant who is in training for his own good to achieve the calm and the state of utter freedom in God. Yoga is the master's. Indeed, it is well known that our master always speaks of service to his abhyasis rather than of getting service from them. Prayer is the most efficacious method, for it releases the conditions that bring about in the most simple way the realization. Some some prefer a long prayer, but whatever may be the prayer, if it does not contain the essential conditions of fixing the goal of prayer of oneself and of what one seeks, the means or selection of the means, and does not realize that one must be prepared to eschew the impediments which could be eschewed by one, leaving the rest to be removed by the master. It is not a complete prayer or a right one. Okay, so we continue. If there are any questions, we can ask, but otherwise I'll continue.
Yeah.
There is a reference to puja or worship. The idea of worship is essential to all religions. The God to be worshipped, of course, should be the highest. The highest alone can grant us the peace that passeth understanding and which is the original or ultimate source. God is omnipervasive or everywhere. Worship involves the realization that man is in need of worshipping, adoring someone. We all seek in worship those who are better than ourselves. Hero worship owes its strength to this need for an object of worship. This instinctive need, which everyone feels, shows that man is not all but needs the highest. What we seek is the master or leader, and ourselves are but his followers or servants. Sectarian names are not very important, provided we are able to grant to those names the meaning of omnipervasiveness. Since our worship is at the heart and concentration is at the heart, it follows that the omnipervasiveness of God includes his being within the heart. That is why the center of the calm is to be visualized or imagined at the heart. In a sense, omnipervasiveness will preclude the fixing of form of God in any manner except as the transcendent calm central principle at the heart, which begins to break through or unwind the knots or circles that have made for the separation and distance between the individual and the divine. I think this covers first line of the prayer.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So the one thing, right, it says our worship is at the heart and concentration is at the heart. It follows that the omnipervasiveness of God includes His being within the heart, and that is where, yeah, divine omnipervasiveness of the divine light, because that's the object on which we are meditating.
So first line of the prayer says, "Thou art the real goal of human life." So first part of this para tells that it has to be highest. Uh, and then uh, the quality of the highest is omnipervasiveness, which is already there in the heart. That's what I understood. Where we need to concentrate.
In the tradition says that God resides in the cave of the heart, with the Hudguha. So the tradition also says that the seat of the manas is the heart, the physical heart. So it is imperative that we get to the God in our heart. The subtlest form of the God, so we can receive the divine light without university. We are meditating upon. That's what real living means. We cannot give a form, we cannot give a name, we cannot do anything to the God. So that is a very light without giving us to the one thing getting. Which is the part of the individual.
Okay, we'll continue. Though one may start with the traditional worship that each one has inherited, yet once this abhyasa is taken up, one gets to the subtler worship of the divine and surely attains the highest state in the shortest possible time. Prayer finally is the expression of one's utter willingness and acceptance of the life of surrender to the ultimate as the goal and means of attainment. The prayer is an oral and mental act of self-offering to the highest being. Its purpose must be defined. That purpose must state the object of the prayer, which is an instrument, so to speak, seeking the fulfillment of that aim. Men have all kinds of goals. Our ancient Ancients usually said that man has four aims: artha, that is wealth and power; kama, that is pleasures and enjoyments; dharma, that is life of law and justice; and moksha, that is liberation from all kinds of bondages and attainment of release from birth and death. President Eisenhower seems to be right in calling these food, family, friendship, and freedom. All beings have needs of these four kinds. Most men are seekers of wealth and pleasure, which is, of course, legitimate when such wealth and pleasure are for the support of one's life in simplicity and truthfulness. Thus, necessary needs of the body and its comfort are legitimate, and they are to be conditioned by the principle of respect for other people's similar needs, which is law. However, these are but means to the primary necessity of freedom from bondage that develops in the use and pursuit of these ends. They tend to become ends in themselves rather than means to the highest end of man, his freedom from death and birth, or rather, freedom from birth after death. Both have been sought. There have been men who have again and again sought physical immortality or freedom from death. They have sought it through alchemy, that is rasa, through mercurial and other preparations. They have sought it through hatha yoga and lately through the help of vijnana, that is supermind. But the real goal is not these, but God Himself. Not merely His experience, but Himself. The Upanishad calls Him the immortal person or Purana Purusha, Amartyam. Therefore, the Master is the ultimate Godhead who in this samstha is called the Guru. All our masters are Himself, since it is through Him and by Him is all these transmissions done. It is His power that is working out the subtle changes in us, transforming us so as to enable our knowing Him, seeing Him, and then entering into Him with our real being. Jnatum drashtum katatvavena praveshtum ka, as Gita Acharya says. Maybe somebody can read it correctly if I am not pronouncing it correctly. Jnatum drashtum ka tatvena praveshtum ka.
I think Ka is Cha.
Cha.
Yeah.
Jnatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum cha. Okay.
Don't know the meaning of that. Okay.
I think it is relating to knowing Him, seeing Him, and then entering into Him. Related to that. I don't know exactly.
Jnatum is knowing Him, Drashtum is seeing Him.
Tattvavena praveshtum means entering into Him.
Entering in. With our real beings. Tattvena. Tattva.
God thus is our goal, which is upeya. The Parama Purushartha or supreme goal, greater than even freedom from birth, death cycle. Sri Ramchandraji has thus laid great stress on this most important goal of life. In this, he has followed the Vedic seer who affirmed that God is greatest wealth or Rai, a wealth which is undiminishing and infinite Achyuta, Ananta, and Amruta. Thus, Sri Ramanuja also affirmed that the Brahma or God is the goal of human life and in fact all life. Okay. The means or upaya is also he. This is what is expressed in the last part of the prayer. For he alone, for he, for he alone has the power to lead us. Indeed, God is God because he is the power and the only power which could take us to that state of his Paramapada or supreme abode, Dhamma, from which there is no return, even as Gita Acharya says. Other powers can lead us to their abodes, but the Supreme Being alone can lead us to his abode. This is very important to remember, for the Supreme Being is the only and all other powers are subordinate to him unless he himself wills it or commands it. Therefore, God, who is the ultimate alone, is the power that can take us to that state of his. All teachers are commanded to take one to that state by him. But if the teachers are not competent or have not the adesha, then it cannot be done by them. In our samstha, we find the transmitted force by the master is the highest consciousness of God himself that is capable of leading one through all the images of the created private world of ours. Thus, superconsciousness is higher than the Vijnana or supermind. Vijnana. I think it's Vijnana. Even as it is above everything, such as mind and senses. The yogas which use the human mind fail, and surely those which use the prana and others also fail. It is not quite clear whether the supermind will succeed as it is but a penultimate mind and not the supreme being himself. Indeed, the intermediate in the intermediating of the mind of any kind is ruled out, for these are but formations of that power in its kshobha or creative manifestations. I think I just have one query for the statement. The yogas which use the human mind fail, which we can understand. But how do we interpret? Surely those which use the prana and others also fail. What exactly it is referring? Those which use prana. Prana is it related to pranayam?
looks like it's relating to breath. Sir?
Actually, if you use the intellect, you're going to fail. Because God is beyond the intellect. You cannot use the mind to reach the goal. Right. And also, to adopt any other means other than the God himself. Like pranayama, anapanasati, or the hatha yoga, or any other physical means reach the divine also will fail because the divine is beyond all that. The only way to reach the divine is using your consciousness. Consciousness is the one which is common to divine and us. That is the consciousness which is pervading all over, and we are part of that. So if you use only that, you can go back to that. Otherwise, you are going to fail, get trapped in the intermediate stages itself. What I understood. The basic thing is that unless you understand that you are the divine, you are the Brahman himself, with a real jnana. There is nothing else to know. If you know that you are the Brahman, there is no difference between you and the Brahman. There is nothing else. No. As long as you think that the Brahman is different and you are different, you cannot reach it. Where's the Advaita that comes into picture? Yes, our goal is oneness with the divine. Oneness with the divine is basically Advaita. There is no two, that only one. That one is Brahman, that one is we. We realize that both are the same. Then you reach the goal. Yes, only through the divine you can reach the divine.
Thank you, sir.
It's clear.
Okay. The Supreme Being or God and Master alone can lead us to that goal. In the ancient Veda, it is said that Agni, who is the divine will, alone leads us to the highest state because he knows the devious ways and can surmount the crooked way of descent of man, that is Jata Vedas, and turn us to the true path, that is Supatha, that is subtle and direct to the center. Your master, who is one with the God, is verily the knower of the paths of descent and ascent, and therefore can individually lead every individual to the highest state. Whatever may be the crookednesses that have developed in him, he is the God of the entire universes, Vishwani Deva. All this is significantly brought out by the simple and direct prayer. Thou art the only God and power that brings us to that state of thine. The second part of the prayer states that we are or I am yet but slaves of our or my wishes, putting bar to our or my advancement. The prayer could be made in the singular or plural nominative as when one prays alone or in satsang or congregation. This is very important since it assumes that man has desires, and precisely those that offer obstacles to one's attainment of the highest state or God. These are pratibandhakas or obstacles which are very difficult to remove or abolish. We know that our desires of wealth and pleasure are varied. Some of them are legitimate, but when in excess, they turn out to be illegitimate and even misery, producing not only to others, but to oneself ultimately. The search for wealth and pleasure has been condemned, and renunciation had also been such as to lead to excess of renunciation. That is even of the legitimate. The result has been twofold: obstacles due to excess of seeking and excess of renouncing. The middle path, however, cannot be arrived at by our mentality that is incapable of samatva or equableness. Secondly, desires are of two kinds: those that lead towards the goal and desires that are turned away from the goal. If the goal is constantly before one's vision, then those desires that lead up to it are integrated with it. These desires cease to be our desires, but our divine desires, but our divine desires. That is Sat Sankalpa of God or Satya Sankalpa. The desires that have become our peculiar difficulties on the path are desires which are personal or private and seeking to satisfy our human and animal nature. These belong to the private universe, which unfortunately has been, for all practical purposes, cut off from the divine universe. When we turn to God, these private desires act as brakes to our turning and moving into God and check our progress. This is due to our habits of society and community, no less than to our own individual cravings for satisfaction. Indeed, the ego itself acts as a brake, as it is feeding on these desires and manifests itself through them. We have our plant ego, animal ego, and even when we develop a supermental ego, it will proceed to develop systems of autonomous functioning of spheres of desires. This we have if we observe ourselves. Plant desires, that is torpor and stability, called tamas. Animal desires, as activity and movement and perpetuation of desires, called rajas. And mental desires of having and possessing and growing consciously. Consciousness itself becomes a kind of desire result. But since this consciousness that we have is but consciousness of limitation and consciousness of need for a fuller experience, ultimate is something very different from this type of consciousness. This obviously cannot be the nature of ultimate being, which is infinite and omnipervasive and indivisible and ultimate, depending on no other status or state beyond it. Our desires have also been habituated in the sense that we have all been brought up to cultivate desires. Thus, very innocuous mottos such as aim high and so on leave the definition of high out, and thus men are pursuing the worldly height, which brings out the result of such ambition, sorrow, defeat, and collapse of ideals of outer region. It has been clearly shown through history that ideals of infinite extension of power and rule over nature and man has met with defeat invariably. Outer power has a tendency to inflict self-defeat and dissolution, for it is not the intrinsic goal of man. True religious and spiritual life seeks inward discovery of God rather than objectification of the personality of God or of oneself. Desires are thus the central problem for man.
We should remember that Lord Krishna himself said it is impossible to overcome his Maya. And he also said, leave everything. And, take refuge in me only. Means he is the only means to cross the Maya, to reach the goal. And what he says, the Gita. Same thing. We also have to adapt to reaching the goal. This is exactly how KCV says both of them. But is the only means, the goal means, you have to take refuge in him. Leave everything else. Only he will love you to cross the Maya to reach him. On your own effort, it is impossible to cross the Maya. As Krishna himself said, is the only thing. He also says that the true religious and spiritual life seeks inward discovery of the God, rather than objectification of the personality of the God on one side. Objectification always means that the God is outside you, which is the blessing. God is within you. Only when you realize Brahman within you, you reach the goal. As long as you see the God outside you, you are failing in your effort. It is a central problem. Unless anything more to that, anything else?
No, yeah, I think needs to be contemplated. A lot of things.
We'll continue. Ignorance of one's true nature may be said to be the cause of wrong desire. Ignorance of one's present condition also is the second cause of wrong desire. Men do not know which is the right desire and which is the wrong desire. We are in a world in which perhaps the wrong desire appears to be right desire and right desires are said to be wrong. Surely the right of Buddha had the inward turn, whereas the same right of modern man is outward turn. And the tables of interpretation have been clearly turned. It seems to be a capital truth that there is a peculiar process of vivarta or inversing or upturning in the human mind itself, which periodically makes the right appear as wrong and wrong appears as right. The meaning, however, in this inversion does not remain the same as in formal logic. It is precisely the business or task of the Supreme Consciousness to reverse or inverse this inversion and lead to the proper spiritual perception of the reality. It is a task which the divine consciousness alone can perform, since it alone will modify the workings of the ego, which is the maintainer of the system of inversions through habits ingrained by desires of particular outward going type. Thus, the obstacles for ascent of individual to the awareness and experience of reality are capable of being overcome or crossed over by the divine consciousness working through man's heart and carrying him to the higher centers or spheres of reality experience. All men are aware more and more in a world that is expanding and becoming one in saying that the old man is no longer enough and that the old mentality is a bar to higher and larger work of God, both in the material and in the spiritual sense. Man is inadequate and confused. Expansion of his desires only develops ambitions, which cause more and more estrangements and conflicts. The upward radical transformation. The fixed ego of ours has to become a plastic and spiritual vehicle of the divine nature. Desires center around the ego and reinforce it, and therefore they have to be seen as obstacles to the ultimate realization of God, who is ultimate. God indeed is transcendent to all our conceptions of Him. Therefore, the prayer starts with the statement of our goal, that is Upaya Purushartha. The impediments to that goal are stated next so as to seek God as the helper and power to reach Him. Lastly, He is sought as means or Upaya. Vedanta indeed stated that God is both the means and goal of man. In this connection, ancient seers of the South have found that the great system founded by Sri Narayana and sponsored by Sri Krishna, called the Pancharatra, stated that true prayer has to contain the essential ingredient of integral surrender. This self surrender to God should contain the basic limbs: one, Anukulas Sankalpa, that is, willing the helpful, and second, Pratikula Varjana, that is, renunciation or abandoning of that which impedes or obstructs of realization. Third, Gopatratvat Varanam, the choice of choosing of goal proper to our endeavor. Four, Mahavishwasa, faith supreme in the Guru or Master or God, that he is competent to save. 5. Atmanikshepa, that is offering of soul itself or placing it at his disposal. And lastly, 6, Karpanya, that is utter dependence on God for everything. I think it is Kripanya. Sri Ramanuja and Venkatanatha called this Nyasa Vidya. In the prayer given by Sri Ramchandraji, we have in fact the stating of the third limb, that is Gopatratva Varanam. Gopatratva Varanam. First, then Pratikula Varjanam, and thirdly, the utter dependence on God and placing of oneself under the master for the change and growth and development and attainment. That is Atmanikshepa. It is thus seen to be the simplest prayer which has a direct appeal to God for a direct approach.
Anything you want to, anything to add, sir?
Very clearly said, it is prayer itself is the statement of the meals goal, difficulties, the meals as well. One short prayer is visited the whole path to realization. That's it. The most important thing this prayer is that to do the prayer and the practice the prayer, do the prayer. There's nothing else we need to do. This is we clearly said this exposition.
Any questions anyone wants to ask or add anything? If not, then yeah, shall we conclude for today? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll meet next Sunday. Namaste.
Thank you.